Hello everyone! Our second day today, so the plan is to see the hills are alive with the sound of music. Is that, Han, is that nice to hear? Okay, let me. With the sound of music. Han, the bridge is all ours. Okay.
Some people might disagree with all those padlocks on there.
The hills are alive with the sound of music. We explore some of the original shooting locations for the Sound of Music tour by bus, which is bound to be a one-of-a-kind experience. However, at the end, I felt a bit disappointed, and you will know why at the end of this video. If you are a Sound of Music fan, I would recommend this tour if you are not driving around Austria. But bear in mind that there are things you cannot see as you wanted or expected to see. The bus tour itself is really fun to go on and informative. You can still see all the key places relevant to the film to some extent, but with limitations.
It's Friday! Yay! What we are going to do, we are going to get out of this rather narrow side street and we're just going to go around the block or around the bend, which is how it feels at the moment. And once we are facing the right way, then we'll get started. So I know that quite a few of you are sitting next to people you've never met before. They're talking. It makes it so much easier when you start singing in their faces. Brilliantly laid out. Let's try it, shall we? If you have a look on the left-hand side, just coming up beyond this flag, there is like a slightly off-pink building called the Marionette Theatre. Now, the Marionette Theatre is where the inspiration for the Lonely Goat Herd scene came from. So that's definitely worth a new one in our surely. If you have a look on the left-hand side, the Hotel Bristol, and the right-hand side, the Hotel Saga. Now, the reason I bring those two hotels up is because, first of all, Christopher Plummer stayed at the Hotel Bristol whilst he was filming The Sound of Music. Oh, a little bit slow on the uptake, but that's not a problem. We're learning. And the Hotel Saga is where Julie Andrews stayed whilst she was filming The Sound of Music as well. And just so that we're all friends here, Christopher Plummer played Captain Von Trapp, just in case you weren't sure, and Julie Andrews played Maria, so we just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. Now, it's probably a good thing that they actually were kept apart, because both Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer weren't entirely convinced about being in The Sound of Music in the first place. Christopher Plummer just basically thought he was better than The Sound of Music. He didn't like the music, and he thought that with it being a musical, he could sink his teeth into better roles. Julie Andrews, for a very different reason. Julie Andrews actually thought, do you know what, I've already filmed one film where I play a nanny, and if I play a nanny again, I'm going to be typecast, surely, and we all remember that film, don't we? Mary Poppins? Mary Poppins, that's right. So she'd already filmed one film that hadn't come out yet.
I've seen The Sound of Music film myself many times, almost every December since I moved to England. I know about the Von Trapp family, but I don't know the whole story. Separate the fiction from the facts by guaranteeing our visit, which is just from afar across the lake, which I felt a bit disappointed because I cannot copy the scene when Maria was singing I Have Confidence in front of the Villa Trapp.
So, first of all, do we recognise the place? Do some of you want, just at the back, just want to move over that way so you can get a slightly better look at it? Okay, do we all recognise the place first of all?
Yes.
And where do we recognise it from? Yeah, anybody? Yeah, from the boat scene. So, do you remember what colour the house was? Yes. So it's not this colour.
Yellow.
Yeah. So the lake, the two jetties, the veranda, the front of the house, that's all as we remember. But the front and the back of the house is a totally different location altogether. A different house. So the way that it works, it's sort of like a patchwork of different shots, different camera angles, different edits to make us think that two separate locations are the one place. There's one example that illustrates that the best, which is when the children get off or get out of the lake and they're soaking wet, and the captain says, okay, everybody come and get your dinner. And so they run past him, and then he proceeds to have a conversation with Maria, and he's asking, well, what are these? And she says, play clothes. So when he's holding it up, then we see him against the backdrop of the lake. But when she answers, she says play clothes against a yellow backdrop of a different location. So of course that means they weren't even stood together talking to each other for that scene. It was all filmed maybe with the use of stand-ins, people who are roundabout, the same sort of height, so that it looked continuity-wise like they were having that conversation as if nothing was happening. So that's kind of what the film production company were up against, trying to maximise the locations, but in the short space of time that they had. This place itself, Leopold Castle, was built in 1736. It was built by one of the Prince Archbishops of the time, a guy called Leopold Count Firmian, and it was in his family for just over a century. And it was passed from landlord to landlord until 1918, when it went to a gentleman called Max Reinhardt. Do we all remember the Uncle Max character? Okay. Max Reinhardt was the inspiration behind the Uncle Max character. He was a theatre director, he was a theatre producer, he was very popular in Austria, but more so Vienna than Salzburg. So he moved to Salzburg, not just to make his home, but he wanted to build a creative hub, if you like, and he tried to do that by having outdoor theatre sessions and outdoor musical events, all in this garden area that we see in front of us. You've got to remember that just 2 years later, Max Reinhardt was the gentleman who founded the Salzburg Music Festival, which is starting this weekend. So he continued to grow his home and he continued to enjoy it, but by 1938 he was gone. 1938, Captain von Trapp left Salzburg as well, and 1938 was the year of the Anschluss, when Germany occupied Austria. So for context, Max Reinhardt's real surname was Goldman, so he was of Jewish ancestry, and so he sensed that he had to leave before he was pushed, or worse, and for a very similar reason, that is why Captain von Trapp left in 1938 as well. So for the best part of 20 years, Leopold Castle had nobody to look after it. It was starting to look a little bit like the Adams family house, a bit dilapidated, a bit miserable, up until 1958, which is when the Salzburg Global Seminar people took it over. So to this day, there's a very grand and opulent hotel covered in marble and gold. It's got its own huge wooden library, but it's also a set of bespoke seminar rooms where a lot of intelligent people speak intelligently about intelligent things. And in a totally unrelated note, you can get married here. It's a place where people have their receptions here as well. Do we recognise, or can we acknowledge, or do we see that there's something missing? For example, if we think of this as the start of a scene from The Sound of Music, is there something missing? For example, a gazebo. The gazebo for the longest part was in that green area on the lawn. And in the 60s, when people got wind of the fact that The Sound of Music was being filmed here, they just want to know where the locations were, first of all, but once they'd got a bit of courage up, they'd want to know if they could have a look at the gazebo, then have photos taken, and then, as is usually the case, if there's somewhere that you've really enjoyed, sometimes you scratch your name into a tree, but in this case they do that to the gazebo as well. And it wasn't going to last if that kept on happening. They tried to put it in between the fetching pink Bertelsmann building and Leopoldskron Castle, but that just meant people had to trespass to do their graffiti. They tried to move it to this side of the lake and along the path, but that wasn't working. So ultimately they moved the gazebo wholesale to a place called Hellbrunn Palace, where it was renovated, painted, cleaned and kept in good condition for everybody and not just us to look at. And that is where we are going next. Finally, you think about that iconic scene where they fall into the lake, and that scene was the tale of three takes essentially. The first take that they did went really well. It was as close to perfect as they were ever going to get. The second take was an absolute nightmare. Total carnage ensued. They almost drowned Gretel, of course. And the third take was the take that they didn't even need after all that. So the first take they did, like I said, it went really well. Everybody followed instructions and it just worked perfectly for the actors and the performers and the crew. But when Robert Wise, the director, looked at it, he realised that its perfection was its downfall and it looked staged. So they thought, right, we'll do it again. The next one was an utter mess. If you know any actors, or if you've read books about an actor's process or anything like that, then you hear that once they've done a take that they've deemed to be as good as it's going to get, it's tough to get back in that mindset or even get yourself ready to follow instruction. So ultimately, Julie Andrews wasn't supposed to fall backwards in the way that she did, because it lost the control for the rest of the kids at the front of the boat. And ultimately, it had been made known that Gretel couldn't swim and didn't like the water. So when Julie Andrews fell back in a more spontaneous fashion, it served to flip Gretel forward and out the boat, eyes and mouth open, head first. So all the kids fell in. It was a bit more muddled this time, and yet they still wanted to capture that take. So it took a little while for the film crew to ultimately get in and try and fish them out and rescue them. The first thing she did when she emerged, she vomited over Heather Menzies, and it took a good few hours to actually just calm her down and make sure she was all right, because ultimately that was down to the film crew needing another take. So once they'd calmed her down, they got another take out of her, but ultimately that wasn't used. So really, when we watch the scene itself, we see most of the second take, and they fall in, and then it doesn't look like they're coming out, and then it cuts to the captain's reaction. Then we see them finally starting to emerge, but enough so that we don't see the film crew coming in to get them. Cut back to the captain's final reaction, and then it's actually the end of the first take where she's full of the joys of spring, thinking, thank goodness I don't have to do another take. And that was the best reaction. So that's how that scene is cobbled together. So if you'd like to take photos, and you can do.
In the past, the video trap was not accessible to the public, but now, if you want to stay at the house where much of the movie was filmed, this is the place to stay in Salzburg.
He's got how many children? He's a what? A captain of what? So she really never met anybody like this gentleman before, and the fact that she's going from being a very young governess to a very, very young nanny and a very young mother, is the mother substitute, and so she's really doubting herself. She's hoping that she is given enough respect to do her job properly. She obviously looks through the gates forlornly. She's impressed by how big the house is, but at the same time it's quite overwhelming for her. But ultimately she sings her way into having a bit of confidence and making sure that she can find her way through the courtyard and rapping on the door as hard as she possibly can to show that she means business. And she's greeted with easily the poshest man she's ever met in her life. Turns out to be just the butler, my goodness. And then of course on the right hand side where you've got a slate with a view of the Guntersburg Mountain. Can you imagine 7 children climbing up there? And trust me, it doesn't matter what part of the year it is breezy and it is cold up there. There was another scene shot at that location on the left at Frohnberg Palace. If we remember, Captain Von Trapp has realised, right, the Nazis are on top of us, we need to go now. So they've got dressed up in the high